Okay, what a beautiful, beautiful parsha, beautiful day, beautiful story, emotional story. And once you come with the lens of the Kabbalah, a story that has ramifications for all of history and every individual. And of course, we're referring to the story of the reunion of Yaakov and Esav, Jacob and Esav, which happened at least 20 years since Yaakov ran away. So the blessing, Yaakov steals the blessings and he's in Laban's house for 20 years. And now he's coming home. And when he's coming home, he has to meet his brother. So he sends messengers, and the messengers tell him that Esav is coming with 400 men, and Yaakov prepares for war. He doesn't know. He prepares for peace. In other words, sends gifts, appeasement, war, and prayer. But he doesn't know how this is going. He's very nervous. Put it to you that way. He's very nervous about this. He's very nervous about this meeting, and in a way, surprisingly, maybe surprisingly, at least from Yaakov's perspective, surprisingly, the meeting itself is extremely emotional, and it's extremely it's like two brothers and two friends who've never seen each other in a long time, who haven't seen each other in a long time. It's very emotional. It's like you're surprised. You're expecting a confrontation, and instead there's hugs, there's kisses, there's crying, and it's like the history of the tension between the two brothers has been wiped away almost momentarily in a moment, and they're about to live happily ever after. That's what it seems. And then if you continue reading, it becomes a little bit more interesting because Esav then tells Yaakov, why don't we travel together? And Yaakov says, well, I have a lot of sheep. I have young kids. He's just an individual person with 400 men. It takes too long for me to travel. If I push them too much, they're all going to die. So why don't you go home to Seir, which is outside of Israel, south Jordan, and I'm going to get there until I come to you. I'm going to get there. I'm on the journey, and that's how they part ways. And in a way, the commentaries explain what happened to Jacob's um, statement that he's going to go visit his brother Esav. He says, "I'm going to come visit you," and he never does. And the sages explain that no, Yaakov is going to meet up his brother Esav. It didn't happen in his lifetime. It may happen. It happened. But hopefully, it will happen a few thousand years later. And they quote the verse that's we read in the Haftorah from the book of Ovadia, the prophet Ovadia, who is said to be a descendant, who is supposed to be a descendant of a convert from Edom, Esav's descendant. And the final verse of the book of Ovadia, if I'm not mistaken, is a verse that we say in the prayer every day. And it says that saviors will go from Mount Zion and they'll go to the Mount Seir. I'm sorry, Lishpat Esav, to judge the Mount of Esav. And then, Vaital Hashem Hamelucha, and then the kingdom then God will reign king over the universe. In other words, it's referring to the end of days, the Messianic era. In other words, for the Messianic era to come about, you have to have the meeting of Mount Zion and Mount Seir and Mount Esav, meaning Yaakov and Esav is going to meet. So basically, long story short, the two brothers meet, they have a connection, they reunite, but that meeting is temporary. And then they part ways once again. But then there's going to be another meeting. But for the second meeting, it'll take a few thousand years, it'll take all of history. And then at the end of times, when the world reaches perfection, then these two brothers reunite again, and that's when the world reaches perfection. And in the language of the sages, and the language of the prophets, that's when Hashem will reign king. So we have the outline of the story. There's a temporary reunion, and then there's a permanent reunion. In between is 3,500 years. So when Yaakov says, "I'm going slowly until I get there," it means, of course, we're going to meet up, but it's going to take some time. So that's sort of the big picture of the story. And of course, we want to think about what happened in that story, what happened from the Kabbalistic perspective, and then how that applies to our life. A lot to do. Go ahead, Dr. Bob, please.
I think we find out that there is no black and white in life, and that I think, as he's approaching his brother, he's worried about divine retribution. He knows from his last 20 years with Lavan that being duplicitous with his father has its consequences. He later finds out with Joseph that his children tricked him. So this is a guy who carries a lot of guilt on his shoulders.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you square that circle of, being a man of God, being a prophet, talking to God, and yet all the time looking over his shoulder to wait for the next shoe to drop?
So I'd say two things. The first thing, I'm not enough. I'm going to address your question directly because the short answer is I don't know. But I'm going to say 2 points. Point number one, there is a debate between the classic commentators how much of Yaakov's fear of Esav was justified and how much was his own was it him just projecting his own insecurity. In other words, he hears that his brother is coming with 400 men. He assumes that his brother is coming with an aggressive posture. I would imagine so. If I say, Bob, can we go out for coffee? And you show up with 400 men, then I would assume that you're here with an aggressive posture.
No,
But it's not.
they're all fans of yours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's not necessarily the case. So that's what the class. So that's what most people think that Esav is at this point very angry, and then because of what Yaakov does, the appeasement and the messengers, then Esav is transformed. That's the class. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is no, he never meant. He did not come with an aggressive stance to begin with. Why does he travel with 400 men? Because that's the way he travels. In other words, he's got his tribe, and that's the way they travel. That it doesn't mean he necessarily. In other words, yes, he's the head of a band, he's the head of a group, he's got his clan. That's the way they move around. I mean, he's an aggressive person, but he wasn't here with an aggressive. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. In other words, Asel goes to the bank manager. He also comes with 400 men. He's not. It's not that he's trying to sort of show an additional. That doesn't mean he had an aggressive intention. So, and according to that interpretation, it's really Yaakov's own insecurity. He's afraid of his brother because he thinks that his brother's angry, but it doesn't mean his brother was angry. Either way, there's definitely either way. So I agree that I'm not sure how what Esav's own perspective was, but to the broader question, Yaakov is an interesting person because on one hand, the Torah describes him ish tam. Tam means a wholesome person, and Rashi says, "What is a wholesome person? A wholesome person is someone who doesn't know." Ironically, it's ironic. Someone who doesn't know how to deceive, right? Someone who's very honest. Some people are just so honest they can't say a lie, and if they lie, they're lying, right? So that's how Rashi says about Yaakov when the Torah says Esav was a hunter that we know, and Yaakov was a wholesome man sitting in a tent, meaning he's wholesome, he's honest, he can't deceive. It's unnatural for him to deceive, and yet the problem with Yaakov is that he's placed in circumstances, or he has to. We're at this for survival. He has to deceive. And once you get into that arena, you're deceiving, you're being deceived because you're not sitting in the tents anymore. You're not sitting in your secluded environment and just doing your own thing, but you're involved with other people, and some people are less than honest. So you're forced to adapt. And the story of Yaakov is someone who starts out as very honest and very innocent, like all of us in a way. And then to survive, you have to adapt. And that adaptation comes with a cost, both material and spiritual. But that's the idea of Judaism. Judaism is not saying we have sort of this perfect world or we could be a perfect person. Judaism is how do I um, live out my values, or how do I implement my values in a complicated moral landscape? It's very easy to create sort of a sterile environment and say, I'm a very moral person, but I don't have to deal with tough choices. But that's not what life is all about. Life is about can I come with my morals and come into um a morally difficult landscape and try to navigate the best of my ability. So there is no perfection because the world is not perfect. That's what I would say. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was hoping you're going to answer my question because me and Bob, you will always have similar questions. But I had a question about, but you didn't, maybe because you will answer it later. The reason that Asaph became so emotional, is it because of his godly soul that he still possesses, or because of all the preparation that Jacob did, or both?
I
Um,
would say both. I would say both, but hopefully once we get to the Kabbalistic angle, we get to a deeper understanding and say Esav is a lot more emotional than Jacob in general. So we can talk about that. So, but I would say it's both because a person has a certain disposition, but then it's a relationship. So whatever, he responds to the environment. The Kabbalah always talks about awakening from below, awakening from above. In other words, there's some things that the other person awakens within you, and then you reciprocate. And sometimes you initiate. But if the other person initiates and awakens something within you, it's both. It's you have that capacity, but someone else awakens it, right? So if I had to guess, I would say it's both.
Right, but let's say if Jacob wasn't so clever in sending all those gifts and doing all the praying and all that, but I think even without that, even seeing his twin brother would probably reveal that hidden bond that still connects them, right? Temporarily, maybe
I
temporarily.
would agree. I would agree. I would think it would probably depend on if you're following which opinion you're following about Esav's original intention, right? Rashi would say, and others would say, most people would say Esav came with a negative intention, and then I think you would have to say that Jacob had to intervene and do things to change his state of mind, change Esav's state of mind. Other people, the people who say that Esav didn't have negative intentions to begin with, then probably a lot of what Yaakov was doing was just for himself to reassure himself. So it probably depends on how you want to read the story. And maybe the story, I believe that the story is written, this part of the story is vague because both could be true. In other words, the lesson is both. Sometimes the story works for someone who is um, to someone when there's a challenge, an objective challenge, and part of the life is also that some of the challenges are not objective challenges, they're just our own what's the word I'm looking for? What we project. So in other words, both these stories are true. In other words, what happened in reality is a different question, but it's not really the Torah tells us the points that are relevant to everybody. And therefore, you could really tell two stories, and the lesson of both those stories are true. That's what I would say.
Yeah, especially Jacob's story because we are children of
Correct.
Israel. Yeah, and so the lesson here is to diversify. Don't count on, yeah.
Right.
So that's what Jacob did.
There's a political lesson and that Jacob does, and Nachmanides talks about this, and he says that this is a lesson for the sages say really that this is a lesson for all future Jewish people of how you should survive in a hostile environment, and that is diversification. In other words, you don't Jacob appeases and also prepares for war. So if you do just one, you're vulnerable. You have to appease, but if you appease from a place of weakness, then then you may be inviting more aggression. So you want to appease from a position of strength. And that's what he does. And he prays. So in other words, he's also looking for physical solutions, but also spiritual solutions. So he has both those elements, both the physical and the spiritual. And even within the physical, there's both an idea of the peace, appeasement, peace, and sort of trying to not make this about his ego versus Asap's ego, but trying to appease the other person, take the sort of the humble posture, but also prepare for war. So then that is not inviting more aggression because you're prepared for war if necessary. So the sages say that that's good policy in general, and that's what people should be doing in general.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. This is all by way of introduction. Now you really want to get to the Kabbalistic story, to the backstory of what's happening here between Yaakov and Esav and the challenge between Yaakov and Esav and really where they diverge and where they meet, and really all of history, and really the tension within our own souls. So this is a very general concept. So we talked about this before, I'm sure. So I'm just going to give a little overview and a brief overview, brief review, and then maybe we'll read some of the in English the discourse, the Hasidic discourse inside in the English. So we'll see how far we get. The big idea is as follows. The big idea is that according to the Kabbalah, the premise is, of course, that God creates the world with 10 sfirot, 10 attributes. And the Kabbalah is very interested in those 10 attributes because those 10 attributes are the building blocks of creation. And they're how God creates the world, and the human soul also reflects those 10 attributes. And we can talk about that for a long time, but I want to stay still general, bird's eye view. So we have 10 attributes, 10 sfirot. Okay. The Kabbalah further says that the 10 attributes that create the world as we know it is already the second try. It's the second world. Before you have the world that what we would call the world of order, where there's 10 sfirot that interact with each other and in harmony. There is what they call the world of chaos. And the world of chaos is in some ways much more holy than the world of order. Because the world of chaos, what we mean by chaos is you have these 10 sfirot, the same 10 emotions, 10 attributes, but they are much more intense. And in a way, they're closer to their source, so they're much more intense. And the problem, so they're on a higher level. The problem, as the Kabbalah describes, is that the intensity is too high. And if the intensity is too high, they cannot interact, these 10 attributes. And if they cannot interact, ultimately, there's an explosion, they break, there's a breakage. And what happens when things break is that something that used to be a very spiritual experience now falls very low, and it becomes unholy, and it becomes destructive. And that's the description. So we first have the world of chaos. The world of chaos shatters, the sparks fall. Then God tries again. And I have the world of order. And the world of order, again, the same 10 sfirot, but they're not chaotic. Why aren't they chaotic? Because they're not as intense. And if they're not as intense, they could work together, they could harmonize, they could negotiate between each other. And then you have the world of order. Now, according to the Kabbalah, what is the purpose of history? The purpose of history now is that the world of order should find those sparks of the world of chaos and elevate them back to their source. In other words, bring that chaos, that energy of chaos, back into the realm of holiness. When you do so, the world reaches perfection. So everyone heard of Tikkun Olam, which is correct, literally means correcting the world. Today, people use it as social justice, which maybe it's that too, but the origin of that term is a Kabbalistic term, and it's basically correcting, Tikkun Olam, correcting the world means correcting the world of chaos, where the world of order corrects the world of chaos. Now, why am I talking about this? So first, I'm just going to tie it to the Parsha, and then we'll talk about what this means in practical terms, because so far it's just a little bit abstract. Basically, what we're saying here is Esav is the world of chaos, Jacob is the world of order. They diverge, they're different, they can't really understand each other. The meeting is somehow rectification between the world of chaos and the world of order. And then it was temporary, but all of history is about bridging these two worlds, bringing the sparks of the world of chaos back to the world of order and back to their source of holiness, and then the world could reach perfection. So that's all you have to know, because it's true about the world, it's true about history, it's also true about the person himself. The person himself also has within him or herself both elements of the world of order and the world of chaos. And the healthy way to live is to be able to have those energies communicate, and then the chaos is not destructive, but it's constructive. So that is the big idea. Now let's try to explain, unless it makes sense, but let's try to explain. So let's start with a very simple example. What does it mean that the world of chaos, the energy is too intense, and therefore they can't compromise, and therefore it becomes self-destructive. It implodes or explodes. So let's say an example. So there's 10 attributes. Let's say love. What happens if a person has love, and the love or the giving is not checked by any other attribute? So in other words, a person would love completely and give all the way, even if that giving and that love and an expression of love is not helping the other person that's receiving. So why am I giving the love? Because I feel love so intensely, I'm going to give everything I have to that person who may or may not be helpful to that person at the time. So in the world of order, but what happens is that the attribute of love is also balanced with the attribute of discipline. And discipline means holding back. Well, maybe I can't give too much. Maybe I have to save some for myself. Maybe I want to express myself, but maybe I have to express myself in a way that the other person could appreciate. And maybe I want to give this, but maybe the other person needs something else. So you have a balance between the idea of giving, expression, love, and that's the right side. And then you have the left side, which is holding back and awe and respect, right? Because love is I want to come close to you. I want to crash right into your house and become one with you. But maybe you're not interested at the time. So maybe now I have to hold myself back a little bit. And that's the discipline. And there's other realms like judgment. Judgment is I only give. So let's move to another example. Judgment is I only give based on what the person is deserving. Now, if I go all the way and I say I'm a man of law and order and I only give what people deserve, then there's no compassion, right? The world, if you only get what we deserve, then there's no compassion. So in a healthy environment, you have all these attributes that are a little toned down. And even the person who believes in kindness and believes in love understands that in some cases, love is not the solution. And in some cases, you need discipline. And the reason why they're able to do this is because the energy of the emotion is not that intense. What happens when the energy is intense and the person, when he feels love completely. And then when he feels anger or discipline or holding back, he holds back completely. What happens is you can't build anything because every emotion is so extreme in its expression, it cannot be tempered by another emotion. And then you have explosion, and then you have world of chaos. What is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal, that intense energy should be able to be elevated by the world of order. In other words, the world of order, the world of holiness should be able to channel some of that chaotic energy. So I hope that helps a little bit. I'm going to try one or two more angles to look at this. And one way to look at it is even with, okay, go ahead, Vicky, please.
I just had a question about the intensity of emotions. For the human beings, the way you describe it, the emotions have to be balanced. But the angels represent just pure emotions, right? Just one emotion at a time.
Correct, correct. But since the angels are in the world of order, their emotions are less intense to begin with. In other words, the Kabbalah talks about Sfirot. We talked about this 10 attributes. Now, when you have 10 attributes, the every Sphira is contained with two parts. Everything in this world, but every Sphira too, but really everything in this world has two parts. It has what they call the light and the vessel. Everything has a light and a vessel. The light means the energy, and the vessel means the container that expresses it. And everything does. So, for example, any example, let's say you're trying to run a business. So the idea is the light. But then how are you going to express this idea? Right? So that is already, you have to have systems and you have to have a company and a system and a product to contain your idea. So there's always an idea and there's always the vessel. The vessel is the container. You want to write a novel. So you have the idea, but then the vessel is, okay, so where did it happen? When did it happen? Right? The novel is two people. What are all the novels? All the same thing. Two people. They love each other. There's an obstacle, and they have to overcome the obstacle. That's an idea. What's the vessel? Okay, so the vessel is then a book of, I don't know, 50,000 words. So everything has an idea and everything has light and has a vessel. If you want to look at the electricity, you want to look at your light bulb. So you have the electricity, which is the energy, and then you have the container. And hopefully the energy is not too powerful, because if the energy is too powerful for the light bulb is going to explode. Okay, so everything has a container, has a vessel, and has light. So the way the Kabbalah describes it is in the world of chaos, there's a lot of light and very few vessels. And in the world of order, it's the opposite. There's a little bit of light and many vessels. In other words, some people, when you have an intense emotion, like the emotion from the world of chaos, sometimes I love you so much, but I can't express it because it's so intense. It's so intense. I can't, what am I going to do? Buy you a flower? I don't feel how that flower is going to express that intensity of the love. So you love me so much, write a speech. I can't write a speech because writing a speech to begin with is already articulation. And articulation is vessel. In the world of chaos, and with intense emotion, when a person is really intense, they become speechless. Now, other people, maybe their emotions are not so intense. Oh, but they can talk about it and they can write about it and they could do things about it, create systems to contain the love. Monday, I buy you chocolate. Tuesday, I buy you a flower, etc., etc. This is vessels. So they have a lot of vessels. And many times, many times, these opposing forces, the more intense you feel, the harder it is to articulate and express it. So that what I'm trying to say is you're right about even in the world of order, there is differences between angels and people people are multidimensional, and that multidimensional the possibility to be multidimensional comes from the world of order. So we're more order than the angels, but even the angels, which are more intense emotion, but because they're in the world of order, the emotion is tuned down to begin with. is what I'm trying to say. In the world of chaos, the emotion is very intense. Okay. So what am I trying? Let's give another example. A very simple, easier example to understand would be, generally speaking, it's not accurate because I'll explain to you why it's not accurate in a minute, but generally speaking, the mind is the world of order and the heart is the world of chaos. Emotion is chaos and heart and the mind is order. It's not actually true because the world of chaos and the world of order both have intelligence and emotion. But for the sake of making the point of a metaphor, so the mind is much more order and the heart is much more chaos. What do I mean? Um, what I mean is that when the heart feels something, it feels something completely. It's very hard for the heart to start seeing um, details and shades. So if I tell somebody, you know, I love you, I tell my spouse I love you, and then she says, okay, how much do you love me? And I say, I think I love you 92.5%. So what that means is that it's absurd because that's not love. That's not emotion. When a heart loves something, it loves completely. Once you start analyzing and start saying, well, I think you're 92.5%, basically it's like a person getting a what do they call it? At work when they give you an analysis at the end of the year. If I could start talking about details and start talking about this aspect of you I like and this aspect of you I don't like, that is already the mind because the mind is about breaking everything down into detail. And when you break everything down into detail, you lose some of the passion. And the heart doesn't want to hear about it. The heart is all about passion. So, for example, here's an example. Let's say a person is extremely excited that something good happened. I don't know. I got a new job, so I'm so happy. So the heart is just busting. Now, what does the mind do if a person's being honest? What does the mind do? The mind says, take it easy. Yes, it's a good job. Yes, it's a good position. However, there are certain costs. Maybe the commute is longer than those days when people had commutes. Maybe the environment is not as well. Maybe I have to work harder. So the mind, by definition, what it does is it breaks it down, says, it's good, it's nice, but some things are more good, some things are less good. There's details. Some aspects of this are good, some aspects of this are bad. It analyzes. By the act of analyzing itself, because it can break things down into details, that itself makes the experience less emotionally intense. And the same thing, something bad happens. Something bad happened to me. What does the heart say? The end of the world. Someone told me something bad happened, a crisis, it's the end of the world. What does the mind say if a person's being objective? The mind says, it's not going to kill you. Maybe one door was closed, maybe another door was open, maybe you lost this job, but maybe you never really liked it to begin with. So by definition, what I'm trying to say is the heart works much more. It's much more black and white. It's intense. And the job of the mind is to analyze and break things down and make vessels. And when you make vessels, when you make too many vessels, then part of the intensity is evaporates. And then sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But the point is that's the process. So this is an example within ourselves where the mind is much more order and the heart is much more chaos. Now, what's the ultimate way to live? The ultimate way to live is not to be intellectual, which means everything I do, I make a cost benefit analysis, and I open a spreadsheet. Should I go here? Should I go there? Let me analyze what are the pros, what are the cons. That's a computer. Mind is rational, heart is emotional. But the way they operate is the best way to operate is having both. In other words, the mind hopefully will direct the heart and make sure that what the heart wants is constructive and not destructive. Because if a person follows their heart, it's possible that they'll follow the heart and just crash into the wall. In other words, I'm following an emotion, but that emotion is destructive. I need my mind to tell me this is a bad idea for you. I know you really want it, but it's a bad idea. I know there's something else that doesn't seem so attractive in the beginning, but that's a very good investment. That's the mind talking to the heart. Now, the problem with the mind is that the mind is has order, has intention, does not have passion, doesn't have energy. A simple metaphor would be the mind is the steering wheel and the heart is the engine. So what would happen if I have a car that only has an engine that doesn't have a steering wheel? So what happens is I'm going to hit the gas. I got a very good car, so it goes 0 to 70 in 3 seconds, but I don't have a steering wheel. So very quickly I smash into the wall. Okay. What happens if I have a steering wheel and I don't have an engine? I stay in the driveway. Because yes, you have an idea. I know I want to do something, but the heart, but I don't have the passion to go do it. And so that's the Yaakov and the Esav. What is the way to live? The way to live is if the mind could channel the heart. And that's where the world of order is focusing the world of chaos. So I get the energy of chaos, but I get the direction of order. And that's true within the person, but we could talk about this within the world itself as well. Well, maybe that's the next step. The point is that's Yaakov and Esav. And if you look at the profile of Yaakov and Esav, you will see that Yaakov is very much order, Esav is very much chaos. And we talked about this 2 weeks ago, where Isaac wants to bless his son. He wants to bless the chaos because he sees that chaotic energy is so much more powerful than the person who's very intellectual and very orderly but can't get anything done because he has no passion. And the tension here is Rebecca says no. Rebecca says if you just fuel the chaos, you're just going to create more chaos and it's just going to self-destruct. So you need to get to the chaos, but you got to get to it through the order. And that's what's happening, and that's the kiss, and that's the emotion, and that's the reunion. So there's a lot to unpack still, but we put significant pieces of the puzzle on the table, and hopefully things can start organizing. Go ahead, Karina, please.
Okay. So I understand what you're saying, like the concept, but this is a question regarding like the 10 sfirot in the world of chaos, because you are describing like the chaos, especially putting the examples on the emotional sfirots, let's say, like what about the intellectual sfirots, like the three first, right?
Same thing. The same thing. If you go to intensity, let me give you an example. So what are the first two spheres? Let's start with the first two. Chachma Bina. Chachma is creativity. Wisdom is the way we call it, creativity, coming up with a new idea. And Bina is analytical.
Mm-hmm.
So analyze details. And some people are very good at coming up with new ideas, but they can't implement, and they can't test, and they can't apply to other fields. And some people are very detail oriented. Now, there's also a tension. The problem is that when you talk about the chachma, the idea, there's passion and excitement. When you talk about the specifics, details, it's very boring, right? Let's say a person decides, I want to become a physician because I want to help the world. We have at least one physician here, so maybe you'll tell me if I'm right. And you're so inspired to go help the world, so I sign up to medical school. And now I have excitement because I have an idea. I have this idea in my head. It's chachma. Even forget about emotion. I see the lights. But then, so I'm so excited about medical school. Same thing about law school. It's all the same. Then I come home and I have a textbook that's 400 pages deep, or maybe more. And on page 239, I'm reading it. This is so boring. So boring. Why? Because I'm in the world of detail. Now, the skill is, could you be able to sense the excitement and sense the big idea even when you're invested in the detail, right? I'm thinking about this blood cell, but I really realize the big idea is I'm helping people, I'm curing people. So some people see the big picture, some people see the details. Now, if you're one extreme, you're not going to be able to make room for the other while you're doing one. So while I'm invested in the details, I lost the big picture. And if you lost the big picture, you know what's going to happen? You're going to end up with the wrong product, right? Let's say I want to design a house. Why do I want to design a house? Because I have this big idea. The big idea is Thanksgiving, we're all going to sit with 3 generations and we're all going to sit and watch TV. Okay, fine. Or eat turkey. That's the vision. Then I start talking about the details. So what should I put into the house? What color should I make it? If I'm not cognizant, if I don't remember that there's a big idea here, I may move away from the big idea, and the details may come out something that's counter to my plan, because I got so involved in the construction and I forgot to put in a guest room. Now, because I want to build a big bedroom, so I didn't put in a guest room. Now, if I had the vision, if I remembered what I was trying to do to begin with is have guests, then the vision would help me when I'm involved in the details. And it's true in every field of life. In other words, there's always a tension between the big idea and the details. And you have to be able to sort of bridge the two. But in the world of chaos, I'm so invested in the details, I don't see the big idea. I'm so invested in the big idea, I can't break it down to details because it's not important. Who cares about the details? There's so many things, so many examples you can think about. This is some people, they're so kind, they want to help the whole world. and they want to do big projects and they want to save humanity, but they're so busy saving humanity that they can't smile to the people next to them, right? Because it's too detailed. They don't care about the details. So I don't have to be a nice person to the person sitting next to me on the subway because I'm busy saving humanity. But the point is, you also have to realize that saving humanity, because you're so kind, the kindness also has to express itself in simple ways. Or I love you so much. Does that mean I'm gonna get you a cup of water? No, my love is much more powerful. I'm giving up my life for you. I don't have to get you a cup of water. The cup of water, I don't feel how the getting you the cup of water expresses my intense love to you. So there's this always tension between the big idea and the details. And could you be in the details of the project and see the big idea? By the way, that's what burnout is. What is burnout? Maybe there's different types, but at least one type of burnout is when a person is invested in the details for so long, they lose the passion, they lose the vision. And if you lose the vision, you're gonna lose the energy, because for most people, not everybody, but for most people, the energy comes from the vision. And if you're invested in the details and you lost the vision, you're going to lose you're going to get burnt out. So there's always, in the world of chaos, in the world of order, there's always, what the Zohar calls Nakuda Ba'echala. You have to have the point within the palace. In other words, within the expansion and the details, you have to be cognizant of the big idea. And big idea are usually very, very simple and very general. But could you have the general idea within the specifics? While I have this project, but the project has 1,000 tasks. When I'm at task number 860, could I sense the excitement I had, or the vision that I had? The excitement comes from the vision. Do I see the big picture, or am I too busy in the detail? So I'm raising a family. Do I realize that what I'm doing and the investment I'm making is building a family? Or do I say, oh, I'm just moving and picking up toys? And there's no passion in picking up toys. There's no excitement picking up toys. But the point is, I'm in this detail. I'm doing something specific. Do I see how this specific detail is part of a larger story? That's the ability to connect Chachma and Bina. And in the world of chaos, when you're in the world of Bina, of details, you're completely detail-oriented. And when you're in the world of ideas, you're complete. In the world of Chachma, creativity, the general idea, you can't see how this general idea, you say this general idea is too powerful to express itself in picking up toys. So that's what I would say. I would say even in the realm of intellectual faculties, you have to be able to have opposite faculties coexist.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, one more point, and then we get back to the parsha. One more point is this: as you look around the world, one of the bigger problems of the Kabbalah that any theology has to address, Kabbalah addresses it as well. And you think about this, and you talk about how come the world has so much negativity, and how come the world has so much evil. And if you want to go a little deeper and you ask yourself, and you think about this, you see sometimes the evil is much more powerful than the righteous. And I would say within myself, it's the same thing. We have the animal soul, we have the godly soul, we have the natural side of self, and we have the spiritual side of self. And if you think about it, in many cases, the animalistic side of self, the destructive side of self, is much more powerful than the intellect, than the more spiritual side of self. So if I want to do a mitzvah, if I want to go volunteer and help somebody, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. But if I want to eat a piece of chocolate cake, nothing is going to stop in my way. In other words, the primal, instinctive, physical desires seem to be much more powerful than the desires that are more intellectual and more spiritual and more transcendent. So how do I explain this within myself or within the world? And how is it that the negative has more strength than the positive? Says the Kabbalah, to understand this, you have to have the model of order and chaos. Because the point of the world of order is, in its origin, it's much more intense. In its origin, it's more holy. But because it was holy and so intense, there was a crash, it fell down. Now, all that energy, all that passion is specifically found in the unholy, because it fell very low, and in the forces of destruction. So now, when you look around the world and you see something that's negative and unholy, you could look at it and say, oh, it's less holy. So in the hierarchy of this world, it's much lower. But if you want to look at its origin, it's actually much higher. So when you see somebody who's a negative person, you could look at them in the way they are right now. And that would be the fallen sparks of chaos. The fallen sparks of chaos as they fell is very negative. But then you could also look at that same person and say, what am I looking at? I'm looking at something that, yes, in its current state is fallen, but if you elevate that person to their source, they'll actually be much more powerful and much more holy and much more intense than the righteous, because the righteous is more like the mind. It's not going to get you in too much trouble, but it doesn't have that passion, doesn't have that energy. And again, ultimately, the point is that you have to be able to bridge the two. Now, if you want to look historic, you want to look at the physical and the spiritual. So you have what they would call Yaakov and Esav, which the sages of the Mishnah and Talmud, who were living under Roman persecution, Roman rule, in many cases Roman persecution, they saw Western civilization, meaning Rome, meaning that the science and the technology and the military might of Rome as physical, but that's Esav, and Jerusalem, meaning the ideas of morality, as Yaakov. And now you have this conflict between Yaakov and Esav. 2,000 years ago was with Rome and Judea, and Rome crushes Judea. And Rome is the physical might and physical science and physical technology. And Judea is spiritual. It's an idea. Now, what is the goal? The goal is not to destroy Esav, not to destroy the physical might, to destroy the science. To the contrary, the goal is that the might and the science and the technology should not be self-destructive, but they should unite with the vision of Yaakov, of holiness. In other words, that order should lead to chaos and not chaos overtake the order. And if you think about this world today, we have new technology. Nobody knows where it's going to go. No one knows who's going to control it. And essentially what we're saying is you have this this very intense force, but that's chaos. And the question is what is going to happen with this chaos? Who should be in charge? Who should direct it? What are the values under which you're going to unleash this technology? And the values is Yaakov. And what is Mashiach? What is the Messianic era? When is there peace in the world? When the science and the might and the technology of humanity, which is Esav, is going to make peace with the vision and the values of Yaakov, when there'll be the reunion, the kiss between Yaakov and Esav. Now, it happened for a moment 3,300 years ago, but that was just these two individuals. Now you have to spread that for the rest of the world. And like we said, when is God going to be the king of the universe? Meaning, when is holiness going to reign supreme in the world? Not when Judea prospers, or Esav prospers, or Seir, or Esav, but when you have to have the merging of these two. You need the forces of chaos, but they have to be directed and corrected. That's tikkun olam. They have to be corrected by the force of Yaakov. So that is a little bit of background. We'll take Vicky's question, and maybe we'll just do a little bit of the parsha just to show how some of this plays out in the parsha in a beautiful way. But let's see. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. My question was about the lesson that we need to learn, because we're in the business of tikkun olam, right? Still, because Mashiach is not here.
Yes.
So when we see those sparks and we don't want to get burned, how will it determine which sparks we can actually elevate, which we cannot, and what we can learn from Yaakov, because he did embrace his brother, but then he decided to separate. So he determined that that's not permanent. He is not capable of fully directing him at the moment.
Yeah. Sometimes the way to deal with the chaos is, at least temporarily, is to seclude yourself. And that's what Yaakov does. He says, I don't want to go to Seir. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to make my own environment. And in some ways, the order has to protect itself from the chaos. But eventually, by protecting yourself, you could root yourself, and then eventually you could actually influence the other. If you want to talk historically, so who won the conflict? Was it Rome? Was it Rome, or was it Judea? Who won the conflict? So you could say Rome, the Romans destroyed the temple. Okay. But if you think about it, especially if you think historically, Judea had a tremendous influence on Rome. Rome becomes Christianity, and Christianity is, of course, based on Jewish values. And Christianity, in a way, is spreading certain notions of Judaism to the rest of the world. And now it's like Rome thought they overtook Jerusalem, but ultimately Jerusalem influenced Rome. You can't, in other words, when you have this dance, when you have this struggle, What's interesting about a struggle, and you have it in this week's parsha as well, Vayeyavek, they wrestled. So a wrestle is a very interesting form of struggle because a wrestle, even if the other person takes you down, a wrestle is funny because if you're a little bit distant, you don't even know, are they wrestling or are they hugging? Right? So you become very close to the other person and you think the other person's taking you down, but he's coming down as well. In other words, we're very close, we're influencing each other, even if we don't realize that. And in a way, that's the embrace, because a wrestle is also an embrace. So when you talk about the individual person, yes, there's times to separate, but even so, if I separate from somebody and I live my own lifestyle and I live my values, I shouldn't think that I'm in isolation because that example is going to affect other people, either in the immediate term or in the midterm or in the long run. So that's what's happening, and so it depends. Everything depends, and within the sparks, how do I elevate the sparks of chaos? Some you're supposed to engage with, some you're supposed to separate from. Depends. It all depends. Short answer is it depends. But the idea is, even when you're separating, you're influencing. Okay. What is a very interesting difference, a visual difference, or if you want to look at numbers, a difference between the world of chaos and the world of order? So the world of chaos is very black and white. And therefore, the number that will always reminds us of the world of chaos is the number two. Because two is basically you have two extremes, and those two extremes don't meet. So, in other words, someone who's in the world of chaos could be kind today and could be judgmental tomorrow. They just can't do it simultaneously. So, they have what they call the two columns. You have two columns, but two columns are extremists. Today, I'm extremely kind. Tomorrow, I'm extremely selfish. So, you have two columns. The world of order is always exemplified by the number three, because the number three, you have three columns, and the middle column bridges the right column and the left column. So in the case of emotions, you have two primary emotions, which is love, which is expression, and you have gevura, which is holding back. But then you have the middle one, and the middle one is compassion. And we can get into this, but compassion is the bridge between giving and being judgmental. You can demonstrate that if that's interesting. But the bottom line is when you have a middle column, the middle column is always going to bring together those two extremes. And therefore, in holiness, it's much more, holiness is not about the number two, it's about the number three. And many things in holiness divide by the number three. Just the basic idea that the Medrash talks about the fact that the Torah was given in the third month, on the third day of preparation. The Torah has three sections: Torah, 5 books of Moses, the writings, and the prophets. I'm sorry, prophets and the writings. And the Jewish people are divided into three: priests, Levites, Israelites, and it just goes on and on and on. There's always threes. And three represents, you have the two columns, but you also have the middle path, which blends the two, and that's where the compromise happens. So, for example, let me just talk about the compassion for a second. And according to the Kabbalah, Jacob is the level of compassion. So what does that mean? So let's say Abraham is about kindness, it's about giving. And giving is love. And the problem with love is the person who's loving everybody, Abraham is not capable of seeing negativity. So when his son Yishmael is less than perfect and actually harming Esav, Abraham doesn't see that because he's so loving. So everything he sees, he only sees the good in people. So everybody is deserving. To a loving, kind person, everybody is deserving. Okay. Then you have the left column. What's the left column? Is being judgmental, measuring, holding back, and saying, I'm only going to give those who are deserving. The problem with that is that very few people are deserving. And like I say, we don't want God to give us what we're deserving because we want more than what we're deserving. So you have these two extremes. How do they communicate? They can't communicate. They're always going to be at war. And whenever the person who sees good in everybody prevails, he'll just give everybody. And when the other person sees that we're going to give only people who are deserving, then there's no room for kindness. So how do you get these two extremes to communicate to each other? They have to find common ground. What's the common ground? Says the Kabbalah, the common ground is compassion. Why? Because compassion agrees with both those sides. On one hand, compassion says, what is compassion? Compassion is the other person is undeserving, but I feel bad for them because they're suffering. That's compassion. Compassion doesn't mean you're deserving. If you're deserving, I don't give. It's not about compassion. You get what you earn. So the point is, let's say a person looks at this scenario, and the attribute of judgment says, why would I give this person? That person is not deserving. Compassion agrees. Compassion says, I agree with you that you're not deserving. I agree with you that this person's not deserving. And yet, compassion also agrees with the kindness, which says, despite being not deserving, let's give him because the person is suffering. So in other words, the two extremes cannot communicate to each other. The right side sees only good in people, and this left side is completely judgmental. There's no way they could communicate. So in the world of chaos, they cannot talk to each other. In the world of order, you have a third column. And the third column is going to be the idea that let's have these two extremes come together, negotiate, and come up with a solution. And the answer is, we're not seeing the good in everybody. We're not giving everybody. But sometimes, even if the person is undeserving, we can use judgment and we could say, you're undeserving, but for whatever reason, now we're giving you anyway because we have compassion. So in that sense, both parties could agree with both parties can agree with this formula. And that's why the third column would be able to make the peace. So what does the Hasidic discourse say? And this is interesting, that Yaakov, when he wanted to meet his brother, prepared for war. How does the Torah say he prepared for war? The Torah says, Vayachatz, he divided his camp into two camps. And as soon as the Kabbalists hear that, say two camps is chaos. Because Yaakov is trying to connect to Esav's source. Not only trying, maybe he's successful, and that's why he's able to transform Esav. Esav feels chaotic, but he doesn't sense that the chaos that he's feeling comes from a holy space, because in its origin, the world of chaos is greater than the world of order. And this goes back to Vicky's question of why he's so emotional. I think he's so emotional because he comes from the world of chaos. So he's extremist. On one hand, let's take Rashi's opinion. On one hand, an extremist person or someone who's intensely emotional, 1 minute I want to kill you, and 1 minute I want to hug you. And they're both true. Because whatever feeling I feel completely. So when I'm upset that you stole my blessings, I'm completely upset. I come with 400 people to kill you. When I see my brother, the natural feeling of love to a brother emerges, and I forget about everything else. Now I want to hug you. And Yaakov was like, okay, but I don't know what you can do tomorrow. I don't want to go move in with you because today you love me, tomorrow you may kill me again. So, but you see, Esav's profile is very much black and white, and it's very much two. And Yaakov is not two, Yaakov is three. But when Yaakov wants to meet Esav, he has to communicate with Esav and say, listen, I feel you, brother. I know where you come from. I see the intensity of your emotion. I'm going to divide in two to signal to you, and mystically to signal to your source that we want you. We want that energy. We're not putting it, we're not fighting it. We want it. We want to be able to get some of that intensity that is expressed in two. We want to get that in the world of three. And it's true in many areas. We talk about the Shema, and you say the Shema, the Mishnah says, so we say in the Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Says the Mishnah, b'chalav vavcha, with all your heart. Says the Mishnah, b'shnei yetzerecha, with both your inclinations, with the good inclination and with the bad inclination. And the Hasidic commentaries explain, why do you have to love God with your animal, with your animal soul? Because the godly soul is like a human being, and the human being, when he wants to do something, okay, he wants to do it. But the animal has much more passion and rage. And if you could love God, if the godly soul could love God the way the animal soul likes its own pleasures, then their love will be a lot more intense. So in other words, we're not trying to fight the chaotic energy. We're trying to reconnect it to a structure that is constructive. And that, according to the Kabbalah, like I said, that's why when Yaakov is talking to Esav or aligning with Esav, he divides into two, because he's trying to create that intensity within himself so that Esav can recognize it and he could channel it. So that's the story in short. A lot more to say, but of course, from the perspective of the Kabbalah, this is not just an individual story between two people, but this plays out throughout all of history, but it also plays out every day within every person, because we too have these two extremes. And then we have to bridge the two extremes. What are the two extremes? So we talk about Ratzo and Shav, running and returning. On one hand, we have a desire to transcend, to escape, to love God, to try to become more spiritual. So it's running, transcending. On the other hand, what does God want of us is to come and bring that inspiration down into day-to-day life. But it's opposites, because I want to escape, I want to be holy, I want to be spiritual. But God wants me to succeed and to prosper in this physical world. So I'm now doing two extremes. So the world of chaos cannot do two extremes. It's going to pick one. And either it's just going to become like the sages say about Ben Azai, the sages that went into the secrets of the Kabbalah and went crazy or died, because either I'm transcending completely or I'm invested in this world, but I lose touch with spirituality. What is the proper way of the Torah? We say Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the one who goes in peace and goes out with peace, runs and returns, has that balance between the desire to transcend and the desire to be present and the desire to bring the holiness into the world. But to do that, you need to have a dosage of the world of order. And that's why all of Torah, Rabbi Akiva is the greatest sage. And the Talmud says that all the Mishnah is based on the students of Rabbi Akiva. It's all incorporating the teachings of Rabbi Akiva, because Judaism is about that bridging of the running and the returning. In other words, you're taking two and making it into three. And that harmony can only come by the world of order. Only the world of order can create the harmony, but the harmony wants to incorporate within it the intensity of the world of chaos. And that's the difficult part, and that's the struggle. But that explains a lot about the world around us, the history we experience, and also internally, what we feel innate within ourselves. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story. In short, a lot more to say, big ideas, but enough to get us thinking. That's hopefully the goal.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much. A lot of powerful lessons. Thank you.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom from Jerusalem, Shoshana. Thank you.